After that build-up, this is going to be awfully disappointing. Dia vive, accordia, agus fulcha. Hello, friends, and welcome. Now, other than Sloincha sometime later in the night, that's my entire Irish, so there you go. But it's a tremendous honor to be here. I want to thank President Fitzgerald, Dean O'Regan, and Dr. Cross for participating in this inaugural lecture. Now, I'm going to talk about why we study work. And many inaugural lectures, in fact, I think most, revolve around the professor's individual program or research. But tonight I'd like to do something a little bit different. And this is because we have just changed our name, and in some ways we have announced our identity to the university in ways that I think make a big difference. And so I want to use this lecture to reflect on what we study, why we study it, why it's important. I intend to lay out some of the main themes of the work that cuts across our department. And I also am going to talk about the place of this sort of work and the place of this sort of department in a modern university. I'm going to lay out some challenges and some opportunities for exciting things to come in the future, and hope that we can identify some problems that are important to solve and that I believe are eminently solvable. Now, in order to understand what we do, I think it's really important to start with a bit of context. There's something that makes the Kemmy Business School quite distinctive and perhaps unique, and I think it's a commitment to a set of ideas and ideals that are connected with Jim Kemmy. Now, I never had the honor of meeting Jim Kennedy, and indeed, before I applied for this position, I had never given any thought to what the Kemmy of the Kemmy Business School was all about. In the last few years, I've learned a lot. And Jim Kemmy started out as a stonemason and a bricklayer. He became a trade unionist and a union leader. He founded the Democratic Socialist Party in Ireland. This is not the typical vita of somebody who a business school is named after. Jim Kemmy was not always right. He was not always, or even often, successful. But his legacy here, I believe, is quite profound. Because business schools often get criticized, and I think rightly so, for being cheerleaders for the powerful and the rich, tools of management. One of the distinctive features of the Kemmy Business School is the presence of a significant number of faculty across a number of different departments who have a strong commitment in their work to the idea that organizations have responsibilities that go beyond simply making products and making money, and that the way that organizations relate to their members is something that we all ought to be concerned about, we all ought to be thinking about. And I'm going to argue a little later on that the question of what are the goals of corporations, what are corporations here for, and what are the obligations and rights and responsibilities that are inherent in that, actually forms one of the key challenges that I think this university is poised to do something meaningful about. Why study work? Well, there are some practical reasons. It puts bread on the table. Work produces a good deal of what is good and valuable in our society, along with a good deal of rubbish. But all you really need to do to appreciate the importance and centrality of work is to spend some time in a country where they're having a hard time employing their population. And you don't even have to travel across any borders, because you can spend some time in your own history, and I'm sure you're going to find in most countries, this one included, periods when unemployment was a tremendous, crushing burden. And it affects everything. It is something that has a profound effect on many, many aspects of life, that goes much beyond the purely economic. Now, I think there are a lot of disciplines in the university that have something to say about work and organizations. And so you might ask the question, why do we need a Department of Work and Employment Studies? Well, I would say the answer is because I think work is simply too important to leave entirely to economists, accountants, supply chain folks, all of whom do valuable and important work, and something that contributes tremendously. But I think that work is so central to lives that it requires the sustained attention of a large group and a diverse group of social scientists. Now, many of us have spent or will spend a large portion of our lives preparing for, engaging in, and then at some later point, disengaging from work. This forms the framework of your life from relatively early in school until gray hairs are showing up. If you ask someone in this room to tell you about yourself, they'll probably say something like, I'm a professor at the University of Limerick. Work is not just what we do. Work is an important part of what we are. And I think that's what makes the sustained study of work by social scientists important, worthwhile, and interesting. If it wasn't, I don't think I'd be doing this for 30 years plus. So I think this is a very important body of work, and I think the experience of work, or the experience of not having work, makes such a difference in the rest of your life that it's something that I think needs very careful attention from a lot of different perspectives. In putting together this talk, I tried to think about what do we do in our department, and tried to identify some overarching themes, and I've pulled up 5. I'm going to apologize to many of my colleagues in the room because I know that there are going to be particular things that you do that may not be perfectly well captured in this. But I think that this really does capture the grand scheme. Where are we going? What are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? And so I want to say a little bit about each one of these and then talk more specifically about some of the particular things we've done. I'll start with the area that I myself work in. One grand theme of our work is fitting people to jobs. People get attracted to careers and organizations. They enter organizations. They learn how to do their jobs. This is a big set of processes. Once they're there, we evaluate whether they're doing well, and we give them rewards or sometimes sanctions as a result of that. My particular line of research deals a lot with the fact that performance appraisal often goes badly. And I've spent 30 years trying to understand why. That's a story for another day. It's a long and sometimes interesting one, but I think it's just good to know that this is a very hot topic. I included the topic of job design because I think this is perhaps one of the more interesting parts of this stream of thinking. I find it very encouraging that you're seeing more and more employers understanding that a job is not a straitjacket, that we don't take a job as a fixed entity and fit and scrunch people into it. Rather, we ought to be thinking also about how do we maneuver jobs, how do we change jobs to make them fit the needs, the capabilities, the interests of people. Some of this work started out in the area of accommodation for disabled workers. The notion that many people who have disabilities can't work because of some feature in the job that makes it impossible for them to carry it out. I'm in a wheelchair and you have stairs. But it's often quite possible to make small adjustments to the workplace, to make small adjustments to the work, to accommodate and to give greater opportunities for people. Well, this is one variation of what this notion is about, but the one that's becoming even more interesting is a recognition that people do this on their own. So it's a line of research entitled job crafting, that a lot of people over time find ways to adjust what their job is all about, and to adjust what they do, to adjust how they do it, to adjust the strategies for carrying out their work, and that when this is done well, I think it finds ways to increase that fit between the person and the job, making the experience of work more rewarding, but also making it just a more effective way to get things done. So this is one broad stream of work in our department. Second broad stream of work, I use the title often, fitting organizations to people. It's sort of the mirror image of fitting people to jobs. Organizations are complex social systems, and research on ways to structure and manage organizations to be maximally effective definitely pulls you into the direction of studying and understanding the way people interact. And I think that this is a large theme that cuts through many of the specific topics that fall under the heading of what we often refer to as organizational behavior. The one that I think is most important here is this notion of corporate climate, culture, and norms. The best organizations pay a great deal of attention to developing norms, to developing climates, and developing cultures that support effective performance, positive relationships, and ethical behavior. And they also work very hard to correct things that get in the way of making those outcomes occur. So they work hard on this. The worst organizations develop cultures and norms that tolerate and sometimes even support things like abusive leadership, corporate corruption, white-collar crime, bullying, and a wide range of other dysfunctional behaviors. I think one of the significant challenges in our field is learning how to help organizations move from the worst end, where organizations are a positive menace, to the best end, where organizations contribute positively to society. The third theme, empowerment and agency, is one that I think most directly reflects the legacy of Jim Kemmy. This department has long been the premier center for scholarship on relationships between employers and employees in Ireland. I first came to this university on a sabbatical visit almost 20 years ago. We spent a year here. Our children came and went to school up in Monaleen, and we got to know this department. And at that time, several members of the faculty were people who had started their careers in skilled trades and as union representatives and as shop stewards. And I think the study of unions is still a very important part of what we do in this department. But I would argue that this notion of empowerment and agency goes beyond studying one particular form of work arrangement. There's a much broader set of questions that I think are important, and I think that go to the heart of the questions of what we want work organizations to be like. What is the purpose of a work organization? What are the rights and responsibilities of both employers and employees? Who determines these rights? Who determines these responsibilities? How do they get enforced? I believe these are absolutely essential questions to our field, and scholars in our department are constantly engaging in many of these questions. So I think we are really doing very important work here. Our department also engages in questions about public policy and the legal system as it pertains to supporting, defining, and regulating work. And I think these questions are particularly complex and important in Ireland because of this country's substantial involvement in and even dependence upon foreign direct investment and foreign-owned multinational corporations. What this means is that decisions about public policy and employment law often have to take into account extra-national concerns in a way that I think is, in my experience, quite unique. Research in our department has helped to both broaden our understanding of how public policy affects work and the workplace, and also to inspire meaningful and important changes in public policy and in the law. And in a few minutes, I'm going to present an outstanding example of precisely this. Finally, our department is concerned with understanding the human experience of work. Work can be an enriching and engaging experience for people, but for a lot of people it's not. For a lot of people, work is a source of stress, disappointment, and burnout. And I think understanding how to reduce the negative aspects and how to improve the positive aspects of the experience of work is absolutely fundamental to what we do. The interaction between work and the rest of your life is, I think, an increasingly important area of study within this department and in the disciplines our department represents more generally. What started out as a series of studies of work-family conflict maybe 20 or 30 years ago, I think has blossomed into a rich and engaging literature that deals with the reciprocal interactions between work and the non-work part of your life. Recognizing, for example, that work-family conflict, in fact, can go both ways. Sometimes work gets in the way of family. Sometimes family gets in the way of the work. Also recognizing that work and family can facilitate each other. You learn skills at work that can help you be a better member of your family. You learn things at home that you can bring to the workplace. And so I think this is something where we're starting to do very exciting and very interesting work on the relationship between what happens at the office and what happens everywhere else. Finally, work in our department deals with what happens when the party ends. At some point in our lives, most of us will stop working or at least pull back from regular paid work. And given the outsized role of work in defining people's identities, the shift to retirement or disengagement could be a major, major life event. And I think we're doing important work on understanding how to cope with, and yeah, indeed, how to thrive with a new identity, getting out of the track you've been in for the last 50, 60 years for many people. The track from starting to prepare for work to the day you leave the office is a long one, and understanding that we're not all going to do that every day is also an important one. I think we're doing fundamentally good work here. Now, so far, I've dealt with our research at a fairly abstract level, sort of the 30,000-foot view. I'd like now to get a little bit more concrete and to describe one of the large-scale projects our department engaged in to give you a flavor of what we do and why it's important. A few years ago, the Irish government became concerned with the emergence of a new form of labor contracts that had potential to really fundamentally influence the way work is performed in Ireland, Europe, and across the world. They needed expert help to understand what's going on in different parts of the economy, to understand the implication, and to frame public policy responses. They turned to the Kemmy Business School for two reasons: reputation and capacity. As mentioned before, this is the premier place for the study of employment relationships between employers and employees. And the team tasked with doing this was made up of a group of very widely respected and recognized scholars. In fact, I think it's fair to say that there's not another department anywhere in Ireland that could have pulled off the study that this group put together. It's a tremendous piece of work, and it exemplified many of the best things about what we do in academics. Solid, meticulous research leading to action to solve real problems. Now, what is a 0 hours contract? Well, to certain types of employers, a 0 hours contract is the next best thing to owning serfs. It's one where I, as an employer, do not have to guarantee any hours to you, but when I want you to show up for work, I call you up and you got to come. Luckily, this particular form of contract is relatively rare in Ireland. What's somewhat more common is the if and when contract, something I think of as serfdom light, because it means that you're not guaranteed any work, but if you get a call, you have the option of saying, no, I'm not going to come. You do not have to accept the proffered hours. You can just sit at home and starve, and that will be fine. Maybe it's a little bit better than the 0 hours contract. The UL team carried out a wide-ranging study and examined many sectors of the Irish economy. Their major conclusion was that these contracts can, in some circumstances, have benefits for employees. They may create opportunities for people if the alternative is either a regular job or no offer whatsoever. But on the whole, they create many, many potential problems for employees. First, they create uncertainty. And it's not simply economic uncertainty. Rather, it is a fundamental inability to plan because you don't know when you're going to work or when you're not going to work. And if you're trying to do other parts of your life, childcare, elder care, anything else, not knowing whether I'm going to go to work tomorrow or not, or the next day or the next, creates a series of personal stresses that I think are very, very difficult. By creating this unpredictable employment relationship, one of the things I think we know is that this sort of long-term, important uncertainty has some well-defined effects. It has well-defined effects on mental health. It has well-defined effects on physical health. And so the people who are working under these sorts of contractual relationships where they no longer have certainty about, will I work? Will I get paid? When will that happen? I think they are likely to suffer effects that are wide-ranging, that will affect them, it will affect their families, it'll affect their communities, and eventually it affects the country they inhabit. Even for employers, there are some clear downsides. Having this sort of uncertainty creates the higher likelihood of a disengaged and a potentially resentful workforce. Now, in the last section of my talk, I want to put forth an argument that the Department of Work and Employment Studies is in many ways central to the mission of the University of Limerick. First, work is the glue that holds modern societies together. If you get this wrong, very little else goes right. More generally, healthy organizations are vital to society, and I believe a university can play a large role in building and designing healthy organizations. This is truly important work because it does much more than simply put products out and put paychecks out. A healthy work organization has a supporting role in the rest of your life that ripples across everything that you're involved in. Similarly, dysfunctional work environments are not simply a 9-to-5 headache. They're a cancer on society. They harm the individuals who work there. They sometimes corrupt the individuals who work there. I'm going to deal with an example in just a little bit. And so I think finding ways of building healthy, effective organizations is a mission that any university would want to take up, and I believe this university can and will take exactly that up. Now, I think that this is something that interacts directly with the core functions of a modern university. What is a university here for? Two things, I think. Building and disseminating knowledge. That's very important, and I think we do fundamental work that's is of great use. But I think the second thing is more important, doing something with that knowledge. Taking that knowledge and putting it into play to help solve practical problems. I think a university that can succeed at the daunting task of building healthy and effective organizations in Ireland will be recognized as a jewel in the crown. Now, if we're going to attack the problem of building better organizations, we're going to have to think very seriously about what it is that we want organizations to do, what metrics we use to determine whether organizations are effective, and how we go about this whole evaluation. And it's pretty clear that simple solutions, like looking at the bottom line, are just not going to cut it. The best example is Enron. In 1995, Enron is identified by Forbes magazine as America's most innovative company. Their stocks rose to dizzying heights. They were making money left and right. There was no end in sight. And And it was really quite amazing until the day in 2001 when it turned out that they did this by some fairly creative accounting, basically making it all up. So they went literally in the space of a very small number of days from being the most innovative, most admired company in America to executives in prison and the entire company falling apart. Reputation won't cut it. Until a couple of years ago, Volkswagen was widely admired. And in part, they were admired because they had done something nobody else had been able to do. They had solved the problem of building an affordable diesel engine that had good performance, great mileage, and very, very minimal emissions. They did it by pretending it. What they actually did was find a way to cheat on emissions tests. And this was not just one rogue guy in the back office making a bad decision. This was a pattern and practice of wide-scale fraud spanning decades, spanning continents. I think in the end, what Volkswagen will achieve is to sign the doom of the diesel engine in Europe. And so it was a great company, but didn't turn out. Now, my first two examples were ones that I think of as genuine bad guys. And my third example is one that I think is not a bad guy. It's rather a nice illustration of the complexity of trying to evaluate organizations. Ryanair does a number of interesting things. And at many levels, Ryanair is clearly successful. They have an enviable safety record. They get people from A to B cheaply. Although if you want to do frivolous things like bring luggage or get a glass of water while you're on the plane, that cheap part starts to go away. But they do a number of things extremely well. On the other hand, I was really appalled to learn that the pilots are so-called independent contractors. They're not employees of the organization. And I don't know about you, but when I get on a plane, finding out that I've got a day laborer driving the thing doesn't make me feel that great deal of confidence. Turnover among pilots and crew is quite high by industry standards. Sites like Glassdoor, if you've never seen it, it's a wonderful thing for learning about organizations. It's basically a set of exit interviews. So they talk to people. Now, knowing that these are people who've left the company, you expect more negatives than positives, perhaps. But the Glassdoor interviews from Ryanair are striking. The stories almost always have the same theme. This company does not care about us. This company does not respect us. This company does not treat us like human beings. To be fair to Ryanair, there are plenty of employees who really like it there. But I would say an organization that has credible evidence of treating its employees badly is not a fully successful, healthy organization, even though it does a number of things in its mission quite well. It went from 30 years ago, I believe it was 4 planes. Now it's the largest airline in Europe. So they're clearly doing some things well. But I think that an organization that is seen by many people as disrespecting its employees is not doing its job. I think one of our challenges is to make up our minds about what we want work organizations to do and what we want them to be like. What is the purpose of a work organization? What criteria should we evaluate? And I think this is the type of grand and enduring challenge that a modern university ought to take up in a very serious way. We have a lot of tools at our disposal here. This is just an off-the-cuff listing of departments at this university that I think have important things to say about this set of questions. And I think we are really poised and ready to attack things like this. Now, if you start asking questions about what organizations should be like, I think you quickly bump up against what is the most challenging barrier, in my opinion, to solving this problem, and that is conflicts of interest. In 1970, Milton Friedman famously said, the only responsibility of an organization is to make profits. I think we've moved away from the idea that organizations are solely responsible to their stockholders, and I think we've moved towards the idea that organizations have responsibilities to stakeholders. That is, groups, individuals and groups who have a legitimate stake in the decisions organizations make because they are affected by those decisions. What I think we're not so good at is figuring out how to balance sometimes competing interests of different stakeholders. For example, some variations of if and when contracts would likely benefit employers and would likely harm employees and their families. Well, how do we balance that? How do we evaluate the trade-off between what's helping one group and what's harming another? I don't think we're well equipped to do that yet. More generally, I think there's a great deal of uncertainty in defining the rights and responsibilities of organizations, the sources of those rights, and the responsibilities of organizations to their own members. Now, I'm an American citizen, although I'm sure that my spot-on Irish at the beginning fooled a lot of you. In the USA, the unfortunate idea that corporations are persons has taken a pretty firm foothold in American law. It's a fine idea until it comes time to hold the corporation responsible for bad behavior. If you look at why is it that so few people have actually been held criminally responsible for behavior that led to the 2008 crash, what you find is that executives left and right say, I didn't do it, the corporation did it. Fine and dandy, but it's very hard to put the corporation in jail. And I think that this is a large portion. But the idea that corporations are persons does have one very appealing feature. It sort of solves the problem of what are their rights and responsibilities. If a corporation's a person, it's got the same God-given rights as all the rest of us. Now, personally, I don't find that line of thinking either persuasive or useful. I think societies give corporations and similar organizations certain rights and responsibilities because it's expedient to do so. Societies, however, have been less clear and less forthright in understanding the rights of members of organizations as opposed to the rights and responsibilities of organizations as an entity. And I think that this is important. For example, some organizations give employees meaningful voice in important decisions by doing things like negotiation with unions or appointing employees to works councils that have a role in overseeing and driving decisions, and others don't. Do you as an employee have a right to have some role in the decisions that your organization makes? I don't think we've resolved that question very well at all. We have a number of different perspectives who say, yes, you do, others who say, no, you don't. But this is a sort of question that I think we have not engaged with in a sufficiently serious way. Just about every organization does things that help employees, their families, and their communities, and does other things that hurt employees, their families, and their communities. I grew up near a General Electric manufacturing facility. They made great products, at that time at least. They were a wonderful employer, paid very well, lots of stability, all this good stuff. They made a lot of money by merrily dumping their waste products right into the river. And so how do we think about a corporation like GE that on the one hand is doing a lot of very positive, genuinely important things, and on the other hand is slowly poisoning everyone in a 150-mile radius? I think this is a difficult thing, and I don't think we have the tools quite yet to attack this. I don't think we have worked through what are the metrics, who's going to decide, and I think these are the grand challenges that we ought to take up. So I will pose to the University of Limerick the problem of figuring out how to build better organizations. I think it's a sort of grand challenge every university ought to embrace. And I think this university is well equipped to do that. Luckily, you have a Department of Work and Employment Studies that can lead the charge. Thank you very much.